We are very thrilled to welcome Francesca Reece back to Ruthin Library, where we will be discussing her journey as a writer, leading to one of the most anticipated books of the summer, Voyeur. But before we get talking about Voyeur, we're going to just go easy. How was that journey back to Ruthin for you?
It was, standard COVID, lots of, there's long train journeys with like the mask, and I've stupidly got this mask which every time I breathe it goes down my throat. But yeah, it was nice. It's just sort of reading time. I love train journeys, and it's been so long since I've been on a train and just been able to read and stare out the window, so really missed that. And then obviously it's always lovely to be back in Ruthin. Except as we were saying, my parents now live in Denby, so I have to go there. No offence to Denby. Love Denby, but...
Totally understand, it's absolutely fine. Obviously, since we're back in Ruthin Library and got a lot of memories in this building, this room in particular, because you were a member of the writing squad when we were younger. And to anyone wondering, how did that experience influence your journey as that writer?
Writing squad completely changed my life. I don't want to sound like I'm sucking up, but it really was like so transformative. I feel like it was such a rare experience as well to have that have writing squad and squad sgwennu in the as part of the Denbighshire Local Education Authority. We were so lucky to have that. It was such a unique opportunity to meet all these real life published writers and to have day-long workshops with them. There's bits of it, there's so many bits of advice that I got whilst I was doing writing squad that I still remember to this day. Also, it was a chance to meet because it was obviously I went to Ysgol Llanbedr, which was quite a small school. I think there were 9 of us in my year, and it was such a rare opportunity to meet people from Rose Street and Ruthin and Gellivor and all the other schools, to meet all the other kind of like book nerds. I think at that point in my school career, I was 8, 9, I was like a bit of a loner, probably because I was a deeply annoying know-it-all with my hand up all the time. So to meet all the other kind of like literature losers from the other schools and to get together and for us all to get to take a day off school and go to these incredible workshops with real life writers, and just to also have it encouraged that like writing was a good thing to do, a positive thing to do, and also that it was, to know that you could become a writer. I didn't meet I wouldn't have met writers growing up in my life normally. When I went to university in London and I was suddenly thrown in with all these like very posh, sophisticated kids who like grew up in places like London or Oxford or whatever. And for them, like knowing writers was quite a normal thing. And I felt like having had those opportunities in writing squad to also, I was really lucky in that it wasn't as much as, I wasn't like, oh, my parents work for the BBC. But I was used to the idea that writing was a career that you could do and that it was possible. It was such a unique opportunity. Like, it was really amazing. So yeah, it taught me that writing was an option. Obviously, actually, like, trained me up as a writer. Like, I can remember one of the writers, I can't remember who it was, but early on telling us that we should always keep a diary, which was a piece of advice that I've always followed. I've kept a diary since the age of probably about 10. And those little tricks that really do like train you up and kind of like sharpen your proverbial kind of sharpen your pencils in your mind, so the pencils of your mind. Although it was such a brilliant opportunity. There are still, as I said, there are still writers that I remember to this day. Alan Gibbons I loved Alan Gibbons. Celia Reece, Adele Giras, Catherine MacPhail, Gerard Benson. I actually remember with Catherine MacPhail, there was this one piece of advice that she gave us, which I still remember. It was about the scariest thing that it was how to create suspense and fear in your fiction that you're writing. And she told this absolutely horrifying story about running into her. The idea was you're in the woods, and you come into a clearing, it's night, you're on your own, and you run into the scariest thing you could possibly run into. And that was like the task that we then had to do. And then she told us what her scariest thing that she would have run into would have been, and it would have been another version of herself. Ooh. Which still to this day like chills me when I think about it. I'm just like, oh God. And off the back of that, I think she gave me a lifelong fascination with doppelgangers, which appears in the book. Nice little segue into the book. So yeah, just things like that. They've all really stayed with me. It was such a transformative, fundamental part of my childhood and my adolescence and growing up. I remember being in year 9 and being absolutely gutted that it had to be over. So,
I mean, it was such a brilliant programme and so many skills, like you said, that you probably didn't realise how valuable it was until afterwards. But yeah, no, absolutely a brilliant programme and very lucky as well. It's like some great names in there. Yeah. And then obviously, because this was a library programme as well, based in the library, it's like, so how has that relationship with the library developed over the years for you?
I have always, libraries have always been such a hugely important part of my life, which was obviously encouraged by Writing Squad, but even before Writing Squad, when I was a little kid, I spent so much time in Ruthin Library. All the librarians were just such big parts of my childhood. My mum and dad were always in here. And then with Writing Squad, I kind of felt like I was sort of more kind of in the community of Ruthin Library. I did my year 10 work experience here, which was a dream. I was just like, oh, right, cool. I just get to spend all this time surrounded by the books and I can just borrow. This is great. And I've got the insider knowledge now of how it all works. And then when I first left Ruthin and moved to London, I was obviously using my university library all the time. And then when I moved to Paris when I was 21, I discovered that there was a library. I was working in a school the first year that I lived there. And there was a library next door to the school which had a great selection of not a great selection of English language books, but considering it was not in an Anglo-Saxon country. So I got my library card, which was great because I love Shakespeare and Company, the English bookshop in Paris dearly, but it's also very expensive. It's got the export markups, so obviously support local bookshops as well. But yeah, I just think libraries are hugely important because they can be the basis of a community. I get so much joy being here. When I saw the kids section, when I was walking up into the conference room, that was really the moment where I was just like, oh! I don't know if it still is the kids section. I'm just pointing the bit where the kids section was, Yeah, and they can just be like a place for events, and it's a way to, because books are expensive as well. It is a way that, especially children's books, they're not the kind of thing that obviously there are certain children's books that you go back to and reread but I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I was a voracious reader to the point of madness. If I wanted my parents to buy every book that I read, they would have been bankrupt. So yeah, Ruthin Library is an extremely important place to me, and especially because of what was extra good memories from the Writing Squad. But as soon as pulled up outside this morning, I just got a bit emotional. Oh, sorry, my microphone.
It's all right. Don't worry about it. I'm sure it's did the children's section feel a bit smaller when you came in this time? Because obviously it's I remember coming here when I was a kid with the school and stuff, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is like a mansion, haunted house sort of thing. It's like a proper maze. Yeah. And now I'm just was it always this small? Yeah.
The thing that really got me was when I was a kid, I was always so impressed by the columns outside. And in my mind, this was like a sort of neo-Palladian, kind of almost like a stately home kind of level. It was there must have been some kind of Illuminati scholar who lived here in the Middle Ages. And then I'm like, oh, it's not actually, it's not that old. Yeah, when you come here as an adult, it's definitely I'm really intrigued to go back to Ysgol Bryn Hyfryd and see what that feels like, because I bet it feels very different. But yeah, anyway, so definitely felt different, but still it was very place in my heart, always will be.
Well, we always love having you back here. And then moving on now, so we want to talk about the short story you wrote that you actually won the Desperate Literature Prize for in 2019. So it's called So Long Sarajevo, They Miss You So Badly. So winning this short story prize, what sort of impact did that then have going on to Voyeur, and how was that process of writing a short story compared to the novel?
Ooh, that's a good question. It totally changed my, I feel like I'm being very generous with my totally changed my life-isms today, but in terms of my career trajectory, that was really a groundbreaking moment. I'd written the novel. I started writing Voyeur in 2016 and I finished it in 2018, started hawking it around literary agents, trying to get representation, and was just getting nowhere. I had very vague connections, very, very sort of tenuous connections in publishing, because a couple of girls that I'd gone to university with had ended up working as editorial assistants or things like that. But even then, I think if you're not really an insider in the literary establishment and you don't have those connections, real connections, it is quite difficult if you don't already have some kind of reputation. And obviously I had zero reputation. I was at that point a waitress in a cafe in Paris who wrote my diary and didn't show it to anyone. No agent was even going to look at me, even though I had this novel. I think they just get so many submissions that mine was just going straight to the slush pile. Unless I think, I don't want to discourage anyone, but it is, but this is where the encouragement is about to start. Because a couple of people said to me, you do need to establish some kind of reputation. So I was like, okay. And I need to do that by trying to get some short stories published, because that's the kind of thing that people take risks on. But moment of confession now, I'm very much a reader of novels. I didn't really read that many short stories. Short fiction is not really my medium. So I took myself on a little crash course of reading as much short fiction as possible. And then just started writing short stories and submitting them to magazines, but still was getting nowhere. And then submitted So Long Sarajevo, They Miss You So Badly to Desperate Literature. And I got the long list email and was just like, oh, the shortlist email. I remember I was nannying these kids at the time and I was trying not to, I was just exploding with it, oh my God. And then when I got the phone call, the fact that I had won, I was in a shift in the cafe and I had customers waiting, and I was just on the phone I'm coming. Anyway, through winning that, my agent, it was obviously announced on Twitter, etc., etc. And my agent had seen it, and I think she's these young agents are kind of hungry for new blood, and I think she must have seen my name and thought, who is that randomer? I've never seen this person in my life. Maybe I can. So I hope she doesn't listen to this in a good way. So she sent me an email saying, hi Francesca, would love to read your short story. Do you happen to have written anything else? And I was just like, I've got a small novel in the proverbial bottom drawer, So sent her the novel, and through that she offered me representation. I think obviously I went to London and we had a meeting, but she offered me a representation really quickly, and suddenly it all just took off from there. So I always say to the guys who organised the Desperate Literature competition that literally, without that, I think the novel would still be languishing. And I would have been absolutely screwed, because I would have been a waitress who had probably lost my job with COVID and would probably have had to move back to my parents' house.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing how everything kind of aligns, because you were saying, it's that process of getting published, it's so hard and there's so much more networking involved than you think, and it just sounds like such a brutal process, but to get that break, oh my gosh, amazing. And we're so glad that you did, because it led to this brilliant book, Voyeur. And before we get into the nitty-gritty details, let's just talk about the cover, because it is so brilliantly striking. Did you have any sort of input in that cover design?
Very little. I think that you always have this idea that, especially because the book is so much your baby, and because it's such a private process writing, I really felt that this was mine. And it's been obviously exciting and thrilling for it to go off into the world, but also quite unnerving that suddenly you've got all these other people who are marketing it, basically. And I was asked to make a mood board about the images that reminded me of the book, which I then sent to the team or whatever, which I think was then pretty much routinely ignored, which is fair, and I'm not an artist or a graphic designer, and then I was basically told that I was allowed to veto one cover, which I did. And then the great team at Tinder Press came up with this amazing cover, which, we've had such good feedback from everyone. Keeps telling me how much they love the cover. So they obviously, clearly are very talented at what they do, and thank God they didn't let me have any input in it, because who knows what it would have looked like? Who would have sort of ever sold a copy? Because so many people are saying to me how striking it is. The only thing that I did say, which I was quite insistent about, was that I think it's very standard that when a young woman writes a book, there's going to be a girl on the cover. And I was quite insistent that if there was going to be a girl on the cover, she was going to have a bit of she wasn't going to be some drippy girl who's waiting for a man to call her and, something from the 1950s. I wanted it to be someone who was a bit more, which I think they definitely have come up with. She's cool, she looks pretty.
Yeah, it's one where I think it's perfectly captures just kind of that tone you get in the novel. It's very gritty. Yeah. And then you were mentioning that you've been sitting on this book for a while before. So where did the actual inspiration for Voyeur come from?
It's a good question. Where did it come from? When I was a dreamy, romantic teenager, I used to always be obsessed with this idea. I love train stations and travelling, and I used to always think about, if you're in something like a train station or an airport, warning, this is very, very cliched. It's the thoughts of an adolescent. It's not at all original, but I used to always have this idea, I'd be fascinated by this idea of people from your past, kind of like you always get in Pedro Almodovar films, where there's someone from your past who comes back and you see, and you have this instant kind of shock moment when you realise it's that person. And then I was talking about the Catherine McPhail thing before, and doppelgangers and people looking like... Anyway, so I always had this idea about someone coming back from the past. But it was, again, quite a sort of cheesy, corny, teenage kind of idea, and I couldn't really work out what to do with it. And then... Oh God, this is going to make me sound really, really, really pretentious. When I was at university, I studied French, and we were studying Proust. And there's this, it's a colossal novel, but one of the many ideas in it is this idea that Marcel, the narrator, and all the sort of people by extension, when you think you're in love with someone, or when you're looking at someone, you're actually just sort of, people are kind of so self-involved, you're sort of just seeing a projection of yourself. So I was thinking more about these ideas. Anyway, and then slowly through all these kind of like things I was studying in school and at university, I kind of, how do I put this? The ideas started to get a bit more substance. Something you could sink your teeth into. They weren't just sort of like dreamy, floaty, hackneyed, cheesy. They actually started to get a bit more body. I was living in France at the time as well, and I wanted to write something that was sort of set in Paris. I kind of wanted to do all those American and English writers in the sort of the 20s who were living in Paris, like Hemingway, Fitzgerald. I kind of wanted to do an updated, not like some old man sleeping around and drinking Pernod, but maybe a young woman sleeping around and drinking Pernod. This kind of. So yeah, God, this has been a very long-winded way of saying it was all these kind of things coming together. And yeah, voila, just this idea of this person seeing someone from their past who they had this kind of connection to, but maybe that connection wasn't quite as sincere and honest as they thought it was being, because actually they were just a self-involved person projecting. So
Brilliant. It leads to, because I think one of the reasons that this book is so involved in a way is because you have this dual narrative between Michael and Leah, and the contrast in their voices is quite astounding. How difficult was it to kind of find that balance between their narratives?
I'm so glad that you've said that, because one of my biggest fears when I was writing it was just that I'm writing both these. Am I being really over-ambitious here, writing a first novel with a dual narrative? And I was terrified that I could hear the difference in them, but readers would just be like, well, this is clearly how old was I at the time, 25-year-old woman writing both parts. So I'm glad I managed to pull it off. Thank you. The balance kind of just came naturally. I wrote it in a very kind of like predictable, boring I just wrote it as it came. I wasn't doing any kind of jumping around. And just when it felt like it should be Michael, it was Michael. When it felt like it should be Leah, it was Leah. But yeah, I also got worryingly into writing Michael, because a lot of people have said to me, like, how do you write this sort of seedy, misogynist, baby boomer man? And I'm just like, I definitely don't identify with him at all. He's not coming from the depths of yeah, so I really enjoyed writing him. Also, I quite like writing sort of vaguely morally suspect characters. It's more fun, I think.
Yeah. I mean, we touched upon this earlier, but that idea of perception, and I think what was so fascinating when reading this and reading both of their perspectives was the way they both perceived this particular character, like for Anna, for example. And I felt like their observations were such a reflection of themselves more than it was of the actual character. Would you kind of agree with that sentiment in a way?
100%. Definitely. That's one of the main important themes of the novel, especially with Michael, is that like how much do we actually authentically know the people in our lives, or how much is it just like, how subjective is not only the truth, but like our perception of reality and the people within that reality. Michael's whole kind of like worldview is so different to Leah's, because he's seeing it through his own filter, with his own foibles and biases and prejudices and positive, all these kind of things. So yeah, that was definitely a huge thing that I wanted to convey in the book. So I'm Glad it came through.
Picked up on it. And another thing that I took away from this is kind of this manipulation of power in a way, especially relating to gender in that dynamic between Michael and Leah. Was this a conscious topic that you wanted to explore?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a quote at the very beginning from John Berger from Ways of Seeing, which is about the internalized women get my teeth in. Internalized male gaze and how we look at ourselves through the prism of the male gaze. I definitely wanted that to be thematic in the book. And I hope that one part of Leah's character progression is that she slowly not gets over it. I think we're very much conditioned to operate in certain ways, but starts to slowly tackle it, you know? So yeah, that was definitely a thing that I wanted to explore, absolutely.
I loved her development through the book. I thought, especially there was that last moment between her and Michael, and I just thought it was such a defining moment for her as a character going forward. I just loved that build-up. It was just brilliantly done. And to me, what was so refreshing was that you just don't mince your words in this book. It's very gritty. You tell it as it is, and it's just absolutely brilliant. But one thing I was picking up on was this contrasting nature to this kind of poetic fantasy that our characters create from expectations and that contrast to their reality. And I think this is something that everyone kind of experiences, but why do you think that people, just in general, tend to chase these fantasy of expectations?
I think it's just human nature, isn't it? I can only comment from my own experience, and I feel like you must be quite similar because of what we were saying about music videos before. But how we do kind of have this image of how our lives will be, and we kind of have like a cinema gloss over it, and you sort of, you know, everyone is the protagonist of that. I mean, maybe other people aren't quite as narcissistic as I am, but I think everyone believes themselves to be the protagonist of their own little movie or their own novel or their own music video or whatever. And yeah, I think we just can't help it. We can't help but have these romantic notions of how things not only will be, but actually are. I think as a writer, for example, I always turn everything into a story. And there were so many times throughout my 20s which were quite not very responsible. And there were so many things when I was in really stupid situations, for example, or like doing like just quite reckless things, which I probably shouldn't have been doing, but I kept thinking like, this is going to be a great diary entry, which God makes me sound like the dullest person on earth. I was also obviously doing it because I like to think I'm an impulsive and fun person. But yeah, I think we can't help but like put a narrative structure on our lives, or writers definitely can't anyway. So Michael's hugely guilty of that. So,
really,
yeah.
It's so interesting because it's always like kind of that idea. It's like, well, this would be a great story to tell someday, wouldn't it? And we just kind of just create these scenarios in our heads and stuff like that, and be like, oh, okay. When in actuality, the execution of it is so different from what we remember. Yeah. But I think what's so interesting is that you touch on the themes of time, and I think it was such a prevalent theme in Voyeur, and it was just that relationship again between time and expectations, particularly for people in their 20s where there's a lot of this comparative going on, and it's one where I think there's this awareness where we're a lot more conscious of this precarious nature of time. And I feel like why do you think that, especially for Leah, she was so conscious of this?
I think our generation in particular, I mean, maybe this is true for every generation and I'm just, again, self-obsessed and narcissistic, but I do get the impression that our generation, we've been conditioned from such a young age to always be beefing up our CVs and things like, oh, you should do that because it's good on your UCAS, and oh, you should do that because that'll be good on your CV. There's so much pressure on us to be on some kind of like teleological self-improvement, ticking the capitalist boxes, achieving chart. And I feel like when you're in your 20s especially, you do have this pressure and you're like, oh, my friends are doing this, my friends are doing this. And I had that in spades because I was like chronically unambitious. I wanted to have fun. I didn't want to like go and network and hustle and like get into this whole like rat racey thing. But most of my friends from university, especially the ones who stayed in London, one of the reasons I actually loved Paris so much was because I was surrounded by fellow loafers. Because all my friends in London, they were really like muscling their way into this kind of career trajectory, and I was just like, on the one hand, kind of like, oh God, I don't want to have anything to do with that. But then on the other hand, being like, oh cool, so-and-so's a journalist for a magazine, and I'm getting told off for putting oat milk instead of almond milk in this stupid woman's flat white or whatever. Like, oh, maybe I should be doing something with my life. And I think you just have that so much. You know, you're so, as you said, it's comparative. You're constantly thinking like, I'm not good enough, I'm not doing enough exciting things. And also this kind of like romanticizing of like your 20s in general. You know, I am now about to turn 30. COVID has robbed the last year and a half of my 20s, which I'm very annoyed about. But again, even saying that, because we do have this idea that like your 20s in capital, sort of all italicized or whatever, is like this important, glorious, fun, exciting, you know, you'll always be looking back on your 20s, which I hope isn't true, because I hope I'm not going to spend the rest of my life looking back on what I've just done. And I think because of that, you're extra aware of it in your 20s, because maybe I'm talking from nowhere, maybe as I get into my 30s it'll get even worse, but I do get this feeling that you're constantly aware of the fact that you should be making this the greatest time of your life, which is frightening.
Oh, definitely. It's something I can totally relate to, especially I feel like the 20s is something that's like, oh, it's that age gap where you're still not officially an adult, so say, and it's when you hit 30 onwards, like, right, this is where you've got to grow up now, sort of thing. So I think people could kind of project onto their 20s that expectation's like, well, you got to have fun while you can.
Yeah, exactly. It's that. Which is why I've been so scared with COVID this year. I'm just like, oh, but next year I have to stop having fun. And I mean, I obviously don't. Yeah, you're really, really aware of making the most of it, I think, which is horrifying and hopefully not true.
It seems to me that there's just this gap in the publishing where you don't really get to see those experiences in your 20s where, you know, you just don't have any career trajectory, you're kind of in that stage of limbo where you just don't really know what you're doing. So why do you think that there is such a gap in this market within publishing?
I think there's a lot of, I can think of a few books which are about kind of like young hot messes in their 20s who don't really know what they're doing, but I think the thing that I wanted to do that was different, which I think you touched upon before at the beginning of the question, was that I wanted to have someone who wasn't necessarily gonna have a career trajectory ever. I think there are like people in their 20s, but they are kind of always aspiring to something. And my editor, when we were editing the first draft, or the millionth draft, whatever one we ended up working on together, was quite pro. She was like, maybe Leia could want to be a writer, do you think? And I'm just like, no, I actually really don't want, I want her to be kind of not with any sort of ambition career-wise. I want her to hopefully develop as a person a bit, but I don't necessarily want her to suddenly be like, oh, I've had an epiphany, I want to go and work at the BBC, or I want to be a writer, or I want to go and work with orangutans in the gym. I wanted very much that she didn't have some kind of career epiphany, because I think it's really important that we don't all suddenly think like we have to have some kind of, I don't want people to think, I think there's this like really dangerous idea that you have to find fulfillment in your job, which is great if you can, it's wonderful, but there are so many ways that you can find fulfillment in life, and jobs are also, as much as it's great to find a career that you love, jobs can also just be a way of paying your rent, and I didn't want to have that as her trajectory, that she had to find something to do.
Yeah, oh, that's brilliant. I mean, definitely, I'm all for more books exploring this topic because I think it was so relatable for me. But there was one character that I just want to quickly touch upon, because I felt like Astrid, even though she's not a physical presence for the current chain of events, she was at the heart of this novel, essentially. And she had such a layer of depth to it that you just couldn't help but gravitate towards her. How hard was it to create this character, bring this character to life when she's essentially a non-player in the chain of events?
I think it was quite hard because it was very important to me, because obviously as you said, we only ever see her through Michael's eyes. And the way that Michael believes her to be or perceives her is so different to how she actually is. And I was really conscious of the fact that I didn't want her to come across as some kind of sap, because she's not a sap at all. She's actually like a really like cool, interesting woman with a lot of talent, and she actually probably has more ambition than anyone else in the book. She's got so much about her. And I was really conscious of that because Michael sees her as some kind of like dreamy, waif-like, drippy, girly girl or whatever, and I wanted to make sure that the reader at least had the suspicion throughout the novel, a suspicion that would have hopefully been confirmed by the end, that she wasn't like that, which is obviously quite hard to do when the only way access you have to is through his sort of tunnel vision gaze. So yeah, I guess, I hope I pulled that off. I think by the ending you pretty much know that because of, I'm not going to give any spoilers away. But
sorry, we'll leave them out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I hope I pulled it off. But yeah, it was difficult. It wasn't a walk in the park.
No, she was one of the most fascinating characters of the book for me. But there is such a strong cast of characters in general. Would you ever consider revisiting some of these characters in like a companion novel or a short story?
I if I would I don't think I'd do a companion novel, maybe a short story, kind of like Sally Rooney did with Connell and Marianne from Normal. That was before. I'm rambling, sorry. And hitting my leg. What I have done is, so I don't know if you've read, so Donna Tartt and Bret Easton Ellis, who were really good friends at university, and they wrote they would often show each other their work when they were younger. I don't know if they're still doing that now, but they did when they were sort of starting out as writers. And one thing that both of those writers do is other characters from previous novels often guest star in future novels, and sometimes they even do it so that like they will get each other's characters. So many of their early novels were set in like these kind of like East Coast New England liberal arts colleges. And I think it's in Rules of Attraction by Bret Easton Ellis that one of the characters spots the characters from Donna Tartt's book, The Secret History. It's like, oh yeah, those classics freaks are all like walking through the quad or whatever. And I love that. I love this idea that these characters, even though you don't explicitly bring back the characters, that the characters still, you're writing in some kind of universe through which the other characters can have walk-on parts. So for example, in my second novel, Anna from Voyeur is referred to as being the godmother of one of the characters, because I was like, oh yeah, I can kind of like, so I've got this little sneaky aim that I want to do that throughout my writing, my hopefully long writing career. The book bombs and never sells.
To finish on Voyeur, what message do you hope readers will take from reading this novel?
Ooh, to be a bit more like, I don't want to be didactic and so they should be like Leia, but just one of the things that I identify with Michael so much with is that, Michael's a bad guy, obviously, caveat, he's a bad guy, but one of the things that I really agree on him with is that there is a kind of like lack of, especially in it's not like this ever, I'm coming from a very kind of like London, Paris-centric, capital city, thrusting sort of, I just know so many people who just can't relax and chill and just like, jobs and buying houses and all these, oh God, I sound so dippy hippie. But just to kind of like chill out a bit and like, God, that's a terrible message. What's the message of your book? Chill out.
But it's good though. It's because it's one way. It's like you just need to take a break. Mm-hmm. It's like I think we're so conditioned to just be always on the move, and it's just nice to kind of take that break, enjoy the moment. And I think that's what I got. It's like because Leah was just enjoying being in the presence of these people. Mm. Okay, there was events going on in the background that were a bit dodgy in there. But overall, it was just great to just see her living. Mm-hmm. It's like without that fear of expectation. Yeah. And that's what I loved so much about it. So I've got this one question just because I'm so interested in kind of this relationship between a writer and music, because everyone has such a different process. And so just quickly, it's like, do you listen to music while you write, or do you create like playlists?
I love this question. I don't listen to music whilst I write, because that would just be too distracting for me, and I would literally start typing out. I just couldn't. Music's too important to me. I couldn't do the two things at once. I'm not good at multitasking. But music was so important in my life, but in the novel as well. All the way through the novel, in my mind, each scene is planned with a soundtrack. I know all the favourite songs of all the different characters. A couple of songs are referred to in the book. So yeah, I always had these songs which I very strongly associated with the novel whilst I was writing it. And I kind of had this vague idea that when I'd finished, I would make some kind of playlist, right? So Vicky, who's doing the marketing at Tinder Press, sent me an email a few months ago asking me if I could make this a sort of streamlined playlist for the book. But what she didn't know was that I actually already had a 11-hour Spotify playlist.
Oh my God.
Which was not only all the songs that I imagined soundtracking the action, but was also songs that I imagined individual characters would be particularly fond of, songs that were mentioned in the book, artists that I associated strongly with certain characters. So for example, Al Stewart, the singer-songwriter from the 60s, I always would associate him with Michael, because he wrote these kind of like picaresque songs about life in Britain in the 60s. So he was, all the jazz music, a lot of French music, a lot of Algerian music because of the character Jérôme, like all these things were. So I had to whittle down this 11-hour playlist to 12 tracks, which Tinder Press or Headline, who are Tinder Press are part of, they're under that umbrella, have now put on their Spotify. So if you want, I could send you a link to if you really want the 11-hour playlist.
Oh, I'm all for. I'm always creating Spotify playlists, so send it my way.
Okay, definitely, I'll send it your way.
Had a question. What would be Voyeur's anthem?
That's so true. I mean, there's 11 hours. The first one that comes to my head is the Chet Baker song, You Don't Know What Love Is. You don't know what love is. You don't know. Yeah, I was like, have I got the soundtrack? But that's also kind of cheesy Michael and Astrid's song, which therefore makes me think, oh God, no, it definitely shouldn't be the anthem to the book. Oh God, I'm trying to think. There are just so many songs that are so important to this book.
We'll go listen to the playlist. That's what we'll do.
Exactly.
Oh, brilliant. I've got just a couple of questions just to finish off. Where do you see yourself as a writer in 5-10 years' time?
Hugely successful.
Of course, and you will be, guarantee with that.
I honestly don't know. I hope that I am still managing to get people to publish novels that I'm writing in 5 to 10 years' time. That would be the dream. I really don't know. I would just be so grateful if I could keep on doing it. Honestly, like the fact that someone has given me money to do this is mad. It's like absolutely wild. I can't believe it. This is like the first time in my life that I haven't been like, as I said, like waitressing or teaching or nannying, like teaching, like very part-time, like tutoring kids kind of thing. The teaching profession is a profession that I hugely respect. I've never done it properly. I can't believe someone's paying me to do this, to like wake up in the morning and write. It's like completely mad. So honestly, if I could just still be doing it, I would be beyond grateful. If I can pay my bills and do this, then...
Oh yeah, I'm sure you will. I mean, the novel itself is a testament to your skills as a writer, but also it's like, obviously as a writer yourself, you're also a vicarious reader. What are you currently reading?
Oh, I'm currently reading, I'm doing that terrible thing where I'm reading multiple books at the same time.
Oh my gosh, I can't do that.
I can't do that normally, but I've got to the enviable position, which is like maybe one of the best things of this publication process, where people have started sending me books.
Nice.
Which is what I've been waiting for so long. So I recently got sent, I'm doing an event, the Stylist magazine is doing a literary event, and I'm going to be speaking with an American writer called Zakiya Delilah Harris, whose book, The Other Black Girl, is coming out, I think probably next week, because it's June next week, yes, right? So because we're doing the event together, I got sent her a proof copy of her book. So I just finished that a few days ago, and it was absolutely brilliant, real page turner. So also really funny. The characters were great. They were really well-rounded. Just really recommend it. Go out and buy it when it comes out. I'm also reading an essay collection by my favourite living novelist, Rachel Kushner, who I worship. And she's just released a collection of all these sort of essays that she's written over the last 20 years. And they're brilliant. But because it's an essay collection, I think that's what I'm reading.
And pick and choose, yeah. Exactly. Brilliant. And just to finish off, can you give us a little teaser on what's to come next?
So I've just finished writing the very shaggy, big, messy first draft of novel number 2, which is set in North Wales and is very different to Voyeur. It's very much about, so basically the kind of plot is, it's about second homeowners in North Wales. And it's about the sort of rural-urban tensions in Britain in the 20-teens. I had this idea because I have so many friends who like live in a capital city who will sit down and they'll be like, oh yeah, man, we all just need to like pool our money together and just like buy a place in the country. And about what actually happens when a group of I don't want to say insufferable, but a group of characters do that. And also what the actual people who already live in the fictional village that I've invented think of them. And it's also, I talk a bit about like obviously in the 1980s when you had, groups like maybe on Glyndŵr and that kind of thing, and all those kind of tensions with second homeowner arsons happening in the Llŷn Peninsula and right across Wales. So it's a book that's very much about Wales. So I hope that I've managed to pull it off.
Well, you've already sold it to me, and it sounds brilliantly relatable. I think it's going to do amazing. And thank you so much for joining us today for this discussion. It's been so interesting. And Voyeur comes out June the 10th to the world. It's going wild. It's amazing. And of course, you can get a copy at your local library as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
With everything.
Thank you. It's been so lovely to be here. Like, thank you so much. I'm honoured. It's been great.